All right. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenters today. Jenna Curry and Erin Ranch are both talent acquisition leaders at Slalom Build, a distinct brand of slalom consulting. As recruiting leaders, they focus on helping to create talent acquisition strategy, lead recruiting programs and initiatives, and manage teams of recruiters. In addition, they are both very active in the market by building networks and hiring strong technical talent across the North American Build Center locations. Both Jenna and Erin have been at Slalom for over 8 years. Jenna graduated from the WSU Murrow College of Communication with a degree in organizational communication. At Slalom Build, she focuses on new market expansion and leads a team focused on hiring software engineers across North America. Erin graduated from the WSU Carson College of Business with a degree in marketing. She helped to create and currently leads the recruiting efforts for the Slalom Build summer internship program that spans across North America. They met while attending WSU, and after a couple of years working at different companies in the recruiting industry, they found themselves both making a home at Slalom. Erin and Jenna both still live in the Pacific Northwest and are avid Cougar fans. So Jenna and Erin, we're so thankful to have you here. And with that, I'll let you take it away.
Amazing, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. So give me just 1 second.
Thank you, Jenna. And while Jenna does that, I'll tee us up for what we're covering today. So what Jenna and I have both learned from working at Slalom as long as we have is that it's really important to celebrate each individual and their authenticity and what they can bring into the role, the organization, the teams that they're able to impact. So we really want to focus on this theme of authenticity, both your own and others, throughout this whole session, and really focus on a few different kind of key components in how that shows up specifically in the job search function of what you're doing. So we have kind of 3 distinct areas that we're going to cover. The first is how to create an eye-catching resume and LinkedIn profile, tips and tricks that we've uncovered through our experience in recruiting. Then we'll jump into how to show up really well in an interview, and specifically in a virtual interview, because that's been a theme of just 2020, 2021. I'm sure we'll see that into 2022 as well. And then lastly, we'll finish up talking about the power of networking and how to leverage your networks to hopefully uncover opportunities for you in different ways. So to kick things off, we're going to go over just some general kind of tips and tricks that we have for resumes. My focus and what I'm going to talk about specifically is kind of some key things to keep in mind when you're creating your resume. So the biggest thing that we encourage everyone that we talk to do when they are going and creating a new resume is to really focus on making it about you. Your resume is a detailed story of your experience, your accomplishments, and should outline why you're qualified for each job that you're applying for. So to help you figure out what to include, think in terms of what set you apart. So individual or team accomplishments, initiatives that you drove, projects that you managed, anything along those lines, just to show your individual contribution and how you made a difference. We really want to get a sense of what you were able to not just contribute in your day-to-day role, but again, kind of what set you apart in that role, and highlighting those things on your resume. A good resume is an invitation to talk more. Think of it as a piece of marketing material. It shouldn't be super exhaustive and include every single minute detail of what you've been doing. That is part of what you'll get to in your interviews is going into everything on your resume in a lot more detail. So think of your resume as an opportunity to tell just a high-level story, and you'll be able to get into explaining all of the context and how things fit together. And you actually get to sit down and talk with either a recruiter or a hiring manager. So aside from making it specific to you and what you did, making it really clear is super helpful for folks that are looking at resumes pretty frequently, like Jenna and myself. So using really plain language, making sure you proofread and catch any sort of spelling mistakes or formatting errors. And then I think that the biggest takeaway here is length of resume. So keep in mind, your resume is an invitation to talk more. You don't need to list out every single thing, like I just said. Really keep it high level and highlight the accomplishments that you've had. So in terms of some additional kind of tactical tips that we have for your header, making it really focused on your personal information, making sure that's really easy to find. So things like full name, your email, your city and state, you don't typically need to include your full address on there. And then you can also add your LinkedIn profile, which Jen is going to talk about here in just a second. And then in terms of like how to lay out your experience, we typically recommend starting with most recent role first and then working your way down to previous experience. So talk about your outcomes, your key results, and really tailor your resume to the role that you're applying for, which I'll talk about kind of in that last section. Formatting wise, use fonts that are really easy to read, should keep it between 10 and 12 in terms of font size, and setting your margins no less than half an inch from the edges of the page. Also watch your tense as you talk about your experience. If you're describing past positions, use past tense. And then for what you're doing in your role today, you can talk about that in present tense. And then use to kind of differentiate and make the distinction between sections, use bold, italicize, underline, just to help break it up and make it easier to digest for your audience. And then another thing that's really important that we like to highlight is including a skills section. And this is particularly important for folks with technical experience, but really in that skills section, it's just anything that's like tactical, measurable skills, but highlighting what you have experience working with, whether that's like the Microsoft suite or any sort of specialized tool for the role that you're applying for. And then in terms of your objective, you can include it, you don't have to, but if you do include it, make sure it summarizes your why and why you're interested in the opportunities that you're applying for. I would highly recommend avoiding super generic traits like team player, driven, good communicator. Those are things that you can talk about and speak to in an interview type conversations. We want to really get an understanding of like what qualifies you for a job. And then lastly, make it custom. So I spoke a bit to this earlier, but you should really customize your resume for every single specific role that you're applying for so that you can really highlight the pieces of your background that are applicable to that role. So for example, if you're applying to a PM role, highlight the skills in your experience that pertain to the PM or project manager responsibilities that are highlighted and outlined in a job description. And then asked a question.
I'm really hoping you don't get forward on. What does it have my freaking?
I think someone had asked a question about colors. And we typically advise, unless a company is specifically asking, you probably don't need to just have a generic one. That's really what you can use your LinkedIn profile for, is illustrating kind of all different types of things about your background that you want to highlight, but maybe don't necessarily make sense to put in that condensed document that is your resume. So with that said, I will pass it over to Jenna to talk a little bit more about what to include in a LinkedIn profile and how it's a little bit different than your resume.
Thank you. And a LinkedIn profile is kind of an extension of a resume. So it's where you get to show a little bit more of your personality. You don't have to try to fit everything in a certain format or a certain page limit. And if you don't have a LinkedIn, I would strongly suggest you to create one and put that link, as Erin mentioned, on the top of your resume. So then it's an automatic, quick, easy way to get to that extension. So we're going to start. I see there's a page example here, but starting at the top with the photo. So first of all, you want to make sure it's relatively up to date. You don't have to update this like every month or every year, but probably don't use one from 10 years ago. So make sure it's up to date. The other really important thing here is to match the industry that you're in. So this example specifically, you can see he's stuffing a cheeseburger in his mouth. This is perfect for the industry he's in. He's a product designer in the creative space. And so this really allows him to stand out and show some of that individuality and creativity that he has. That said, if you were in the legal field or something that maybe isn't as playful, being able to stuff a cheeseburger in your face, you probably would want to go with a profile photo that's more applicable to that industry. Really, all in all, you can't go wrong with just a headshot. But the thing to call out here is this is where to remember to be you as well. You also don't need to be dressed in a suit and tie just for a photo op. So you want to make sure you can display who you are. And if you can and want to show a little personality in there, you can. Moving on to the next section, it's the about section. So this is the very top kind of what could be like an objective on a resume. So personal summary. So this is where you can show up, make it a little bit more personal. And this is where you have the space to showcase that. So I recommend starting with at least 3 or 4 sentences here that showcase exactly that, who you are. So you really want to include your values and your why in this, because the experience is going to show up throughout the rest of the profile and on your resume. So that could be things like motivations, what's important to you, why you love doing what you do. So really start off with kind of a story of who you are. Think of it as your first impression from a digital perspective. And then because this is the first section that employers or recruiters will look at, it's also an opportunity for you to really simply list out some of those technical skills, technical programs, specific knowledge that you have that pertain to the job you're trying to get. So they're front and center. These will show up in the rest of your profile a couple of different times. They will also show up on your resume. But as you can see here, he has 4 that are listed out. Super easy to, your eyes go straight there. You're like, I know exactly what this person does. The last part of this, you'll see if you have any personal websites or portfolios, or if you're in the technology space, you have something like a GitHub, or you're in the marketing space and you have a social media profiles that are appropriate to put on here, you definitely want to link those. And you can see that right here in this example. Because he's in the creative space, he does have his own online portfolio that is a portfolio of all the work that he's done that can showcase his skills in action. Not everyone's going to have this. Me, myself, as a recruiter, I don't have an online portfolio. I don't have an online website. So I don't have that. But if you do, and it's going to show more of who you are and your skills, absolutely include those. You can also include a PDF attachment of your resume here on your LinkedIn profile. So just as you put the link in your resume, put your resume here on your LinkedIn as well. Next, kind of going down through the profile a little bit, your experience section. So a couple things, you're going to want to highlight your growth by showing if and when you've changed titles within the same company. I think it's really important to call out, this could be a promotion, or it could be a lateral move or a move to a different department, or any kind of change in your career. So as you'll see, that first kind of arrow is pointing out this person changed roles 3 different times at the company that they're currently at. So any kind of movement is really important to call out. The next part of that is you're going to want to, in every single role, choose a few sentences or bullet points to explain what you did in that role. So a really easy way to get a LinkedIn started or completed is you can copy this from your resume because you have that in there. But it's also an opportunity for you to add a little bit more because you don't have that space constraint. Like Erin mentioned, you don't want to add every single thing you've ever done because you don't want this to get too lengthy either, but you can focus a little bit more on the specifics if you want. We really recommend, just like in your resume, you include specific projects you've worked on, specific skills you have, and your personal contributions to a team. And it's also really important to call out areas of ownership or accomplishments or just leadership in general, even if you weren't considered in a leadership role. So those are where those other arrows are pointing to. You'll see in that first one, this person's really pointing out that they're helping others progress their career. And that one at the bottom is really pointing to some specific technical skills that this person has to highlight. When you scroll further down in that LinkedIn profile, there's a ton of different sections: education, certifications, there's the skills, honors and awards, volunteer. There's a lot of stuff going on down there. Fill it out if you have that experience, and add relevant stuff to it. So I want to make an emphasis on relevant, because a lot of us tend to want to keep everything on there and show everything that we've always done because we're proud of it, and as we should be. But let's say maybe you're right out of school and you received some educational scholarships. That would be appropriate if you're recently out of out of your schooling. If you're midway through your career, you've been working for a decade or two, maybe adding those scholarships isn't as important as adding some of the special recognition you've gotten, some of the roles that you've been in. So really always revisit your profile to keep it up to date and relevant. As you'll see in this example, they have education as well as certifications and volunteer experience. It's okay if some of these things don't relate to the profession that you're in. Certifications show that you're kind of a continuous learner. A lot of companies love to see that. Volunteer experience, some people have the time to do that, some people don't. It's okay if you do or don't, but if it's relevant and something you're proud of, put it on there. And last but not least, what you don't see on here in this screenshot is the recommendations section. So there's an opportunity on LinkedIn to ask other people on the platform for recommendations. And this is a really great way, little thing to make your profile stand out. And you can ask for recommendations from maybe classmates, professors, if you're still in school, or coworkers, peers, managers, really anyone who you've had a professional connection with. And you can return the favor as well. But it's a great idea to ask for recommendations and keep those up to date, because it could be eye-catching for an employer. And that's really it for the LinkedIn tips. I'd say the last thing I want to mention is just be really visible on the platform. Complete your profile. If you take anything away from this, just the more you put in a profile, the more that this is going to work for you. It's a free service, and a lot of companies are on LinkedIn proactively looking for people to hire. So whether you're looking for a job or not, a lot of companies are using the platform to search for profiles that have specific keywords and specific experiences. So complete your profile. That'll be the number one thing that will help. And then there's a couple tips and tricks. So if you are actively searching for a job, there is a setting that you can raise your flag and set your status to open to new opportunities. So what that does is it gives any recruiter or employer on the platform a heads up that you are open to making a move. And it ups your chances of someone potentially proactively just reaching out to you. A little asterisk here: if you are currently employed and you don't want your current employer knowing you're open to opportunities, LinkedIn does take the steps to make this flag private from your current employer, assuming your profile is up to date and whoever's looking at your profile is up to date. But it's a nice little thing that they've built into that setting. So it's not just all over LinkedIn that you're looking for a new role. And that's it with the resume and LinkedIn tips. We're going to transition now and talk about how to show up well in an interview.
Awesome. Thank you, Jenna. So Jenna and I, obviously interviewing candidates all the time, know that interviewing can be a really stressful experience. And what we wanted to share back with all of you was how to make it less stressful and how to really show up as you, and better ways to prepare for those conversations. So I think one of the biggest things that we always encourage our candidates to keep in mind is that they're interviewing us as much as we're interviewing them. So a few ways to just really be prepared and know like the types of questions you want to ask, and make sure you're walking out of the interview conversations with all of the information that you need to know, is by doing your research. So get to know your interview team. Typically in an interview confirmation, hopefully oftentimes recruiters will provide a list of people that you'll be meeting with. So take the time to look at their LinkedIn profiles. And if you don't get that information up front, ask for it. They know who you're meeting with. They have to schedule it. So they have that for you. And those are great ways to formulate questions about the individuals that you're talking to and really get some good insight into what their career path has been at their company and just things that are very specific to them and their growth that they can share with you that you can take into consideration when you're interviewing companies. Also do your research about the company. Look at their website, understand their values, understand how they operate, understand their mission, make sure all of that aligns with you and where you want to be and how you want to grow. I'd also really emphasize know why you're interested in a company. I think, especially right now, there's so many companies out there that are hiring that it could be really easy to just kind of interview for a bunch of different things without actually figuring out why you're interested in and why you're wanting to pursue opportunities with that company. So definitely having kind of an elevator pitch, both about yourself, but also with the why of why you're interested, so you can answer that question if that comes up. And then lastly, this is very, very tactical, but check in on dress code if it's not super obvious, and make sure that you show up to match the environment of your interviewing team. So if it's a tech company and they're really casual and you show up in a suit and tie, that maybe, just shows that you didn't do enough research there. So it may sound silly to check in on that, but definitely encourage you to ask that question if it's not shared with you or super obvious based on the research that you've done, but try and match the environment that you're stepping into as best you can. So now that you've done all your research, you're actually going into the interview. We want to talk about how to really be engaged and show your interest throughout the conversation. So as I mentioned before, you've done all your research about the company, you know why you're wanting to talk to them, have that prepared and be able to pitch why you're interested both in the company and in the role. So make sure your pitch is natural and highlights your values as an employee to the organization. And really just emphasize like who you are as a potential person joining the organization. In terms of, again, how to show up in that meeting, it's really important to prepare thoughtful questions and ask those throughout. So make sure that interview conversation is a two-way street. Typically, and hopefully, there'll be opportunity to kind of sprinkle in the questions that you have throughout the conversation. But if not, you can also save those to the end if it's just kind of a back and forth of question and answering on the interviewer side. But again, you should hopefully have the opportunity to ask those more regularly versus just at the end. In terms of how to like physically show up as being engaged, you can really focus on your eye contact, paying attention to the body language and nonverbal cues. If you're sitting there with like your arms crossed or your head in your hand, that's probably not coming off as being the most engaged interviewee. So just kind of pay attention to how you're showing up on that front. And then you're obviously going to get asked a lot of questions in interviews. So don't be afraid to say, I don't know, and ask for clarification if you don't understand a question. And then if you don't have a great answer to a question or you don't know something about what they're asking of you, it's okay to say, I don't know, but back that up with how you would want to approach learning about that if that is something that you're unfamiliar with. And then the last piece of feedback, so now that you've done your interview, blown them away, hopefully, we always encourage follow-up. So make sure to send thank you emails. I still get cards sometimes, but I think an email is perfectly fine, whether you get the job or not. So despite the outcome, going through an interview process could really set you up for potential future opportunities down the road with that company, even if the existing role that you interviewed for doesn't necessarily pan out. So use that kind of after interview opportunity to continue to build rapport with the company that you're working with, because chances are they'll think of you for future things that pop up with them. I know that happens with us all the time. We'll have candidates that maybe just don't have quite the right skill set at the time that we interview them, but we've had a really great experience. We know they're awesome. They go and do some work to build their skills. And then 6 months, a year, 2 years later, we revisit them and are able to bring them on board. So definitely use that to your advantage, again, regardless of the outcome, but hopefully it works out. And then I know just with the shift to being virtual, a lot of interviews are still continuing to happen in a virtual setting. So Jenna's going to share a little bit more about how we can still show up and be engaged in a virtual type of interview.
Right, great transition. Interviewing virtually, even if you've done it a lot over the years but more specifically these last couple of years, they can be super weird at first and a little uncomfortable. But just like with most things, the more practice and the more preparation, the more comfort you'll have. And know that everyone's approaching a video interview with that same kind of like, oh, this is kind of weird mentality. So first thing that you can do to really set yourself up for success is just come really prepared. So even if you consider yourself like a computer whiz, a technology expert, it's really important for you to test the device you're going to be using for that interview and the interview technology platform prior to the interview. There's a lot of different platforms out there. We're using Zoom right now. Some companies use Microsoft Teams, WebEx, their own internal platforms. So they all function a little bit differently. There's permissions for video and camera that you need to set up prior. So definitely take the time to check it all out, even if you've used that platform 100 times before. And this one might sound obvious, but location is really important. So you want to find a quiet place with relatively good lighting if you can, and a strong internet connection for you to have the smoothest experience. That said, everyone is in a different scenario and working through these particular times in their own way, and employers know that. So if you have kids at home during your interview, or a needy pet that likes to run across your computer screen, or random construction happening outside, it's okay. That happens to everyone and everyone gets it. That's happened many times in interviews I've been in. All you need to do is just address it if it comes up, and not make it something like, oh, I'm so sorry. It's life that happens. So address it and then continue to move on with that interview. And like Erin mentioned, dress code's just as important behind a video screen as it is in person. So I know it's only the top half of you that people can see, but show up in the right manner, even behind a screen. The next thing to do to just nail a virtual interview is to just be aware. So this is the one that's probably the hardest. Depending on the platform you're using, you might have a square that you show up in, and maybe it's over to this side, or maybe it's down in the corner, and it's really hard not to want to look at yourself. It's just like a natural reaction a lot of people have, but try to keep an eye on the camera when you're talking or on that person. It's like really when your eyes kind of dart back and forth over a screen, the person on the other side can see that. And it's, while not a deal breaker, it can be just distracting to the interviewer that you're talking to. In addition to kind of distracting things, framing yourself in the window is also something you're going to want to make sure, and you can do that when you test your device. But you're not going to want to be over to one side or to the other side. Again, it's not going to be a deal breaker for the job, but it's just going to be something that might distract your interviewer if you're not really framed up. And it's okay to be a little bit further away, or a little bit closer depending on your situation. But it's always great to have just like a few inches above your head, and to, again, be as central as you can in that frame. And then last but not least, kind of going back to that theme of being you and being authentic, it's okay to show up as you behind a video screen. So if you talk with your hands, which both me and Erin do, if you haven't noticed, it's okay to do that behind a screen. If you were going to do that, if you were in person with them, like show that personality. It's okay to still react and move around and laugh behind a video screen, which might feel a little foreign at first, especially if you haven't done a lot of video chats. But that's one piece of advice we want to give back to everyone is try to show up as authentically as you can in the situation that you're in. And that's really it for interviewing. So I know we went over a lot of tactical and actionable things that hopefully you guys can all take away and start incorporating into your interviews. But we're going to shift gears a little bit now and talk about kind of our last topic here on how to network.
Awesome. So networking is a super important and powerful tool that I think if someone had told me several years, or if someone hadn't told me several years ago how important it was, it would have, I think, personally impacted just like where I've ended up. So networking has actually gotten me to the role that I'm in today. Jenna obviously is part of my personal network, but I was in a position where I wasn't really looking for a new role, and she reached out to say like, hey, our team's growing. Would you be interested in having a conversation? And that's how I landed at Slalom. That's actually how quite a few people on our team landed at Slalom. So our point in sharing just about networking is really being intentional and focusing on using networking to your advantage. So for those of you who maybe don't know a ton about networking, we'll talk a little bit about what it actually is and then why we would want to do it. So professional networking really just means building a network of professional relationships. It's about meeting people and establishing mutually beneficial connections with people in your profession or industry or even socially. Really, networking can be both like internally in your company and the role that you're in today, and also externally with folks across a variety of different companies. So we network to enable, personal connection across a variety of different areas, but also it's a really cool way for job opportunities to come our way. I think a lot of times when companies hire, we, especially in recruiting roles, but even our teams that we work with, we know they immediately think about who in their network might be a great fit for an opportunity that we have coming up. And then that's how we get referrals and recommendations without actually having to like go out and search for a role. So a strong professional network can really help you in a job search and present opportunities to you that like you might not go out and find on your own or by looking at websites. And then it also, on the flip side of that, enables you to share potential opportunities with folks in your network. So if your team at your company is hiring, you can utilize your network and share that opportunity with people who you think might be interested. So again, that's going back to the mutually beneficial kind of connection and relationship. But really having a strong network kind of enables several things, but I think in context for what we're talking about now, it specifically relates to potential job opportunities and those things getting surfaced that you might not be able to find elsewhere. So networking, while we're talking about it very tactically, should be more focused on long-term gain. You have to be intentional with it. You have to focus on nurturing relationships over time and really setting yourself up for a good future position. So we've seen instances of like big companies going through layoffs and people posting to their networks on like LinkedIn for tips on what companies are hiring or where they might be able to find their job search. So having those relationships established, even if you're not looking to get something immediately out of it, is really great for kind of long-term, both for yourself and the people that you're connected with. So now that we've gotten to talk through kind of what networking is and demystifying why we do it, Jenna can share a little bit more about how to approach it.
Yeah, so how do you network? It can be overwhelming a bit, but I think the important thing is to know that opportunity is everywhere. And Erin kind of shared a couple of those examples, but one of the more well-known things that come to mind when you're like, okay, I'm gonna go start my networking journey is to start with professional networking groups and meetups. So example, there's a group called Product Professionals based in Seattle, or there's a group that's Java devs in Seattle. And basically these professional networking groups and meetup groups are online communities that meet up in person or virtually on a regular cadence. And these things are great events and great clubs almost to find like-minded, like interested folks, people who do what you do or who are interested in doing what you do or want to do what you do. So it's a really safe place to start. And when you attend one of these, just like Erin mentioned, you want to attend them with intention. You want to go with the intention of talking to people, putting yourself out there, building a connection, which can be a little uncomfortable and a little intimidating. But you have to remember that the professional groups like that, everyone is going to those events to do the same thing. So everyone is approaching that with the same kind of fear, maybe nervousness a bit, or with the same intent of like, hey, I want to go find folks who like the same thing as me. And that's why those groups are so great. In addition to that, one of the more obvious ones is your social circle of friends and family. They all might have a day job, work at a company, they're in professions. If you're looking for a new company or maybe looking to career change, this is a really good way of diving in and getting some more information around what other people do in their jobs. What do their companies do? What are their companies' missions? Like, you can start dipping your toes into a really safe space with people you already know, is a great place to start. It really comes down to being proactive is how you're going to be successful in networking. And so I know I just mentioned a couple of things that you could do. Another one that takes a little bit more proactive intent is reaching out to people in roles that you're interested in to do more of like an informational chat. So that could be within the current company you work at now. You grab a coffee or a virtual coffee, whatever it may be, with someone in a different business unit or a different group, to learn more about what they do, what their department does, what their role is, what are the skills that are necessary to do that job. If you're looking to maybe do a career change or team change. Also, the harder way of doing an informational chat is to reach out to people you've never met. So you can do that using platforms like LinkedIn or like the community groups. There's a website called Meetup that hosts a lot of those professional groups. There's a lot of Facebook community groups out there. There's a lot of platforms that have groups, and all of those platforms have a messaging ability. So while it does take some courage to kind of reach out to a stranger, if you use one of those professional platforms like LinkedIn, that's what it's there for. So it's really not coming too far out of the blue. So I would encourage you to kind of get out of your comfort zone. While doing that doesn't always guarantee a response, it is super rewarding when you can make a connection with someone on a platform like LinkedIn, have an informational chat, learn about a company or a role or a profession. And just like Erin mentioned, that could maybe be a long-term connection that, sure, you don't join that company tomorrow, but maybe you do next year when there's a role open because you've had that chat with that person. And last but not least, got to find the hidden gems. So we just talked about some of the more traditional ways of professional networking using your circle and those groups, but there's a lot of power in the avenues that are not as obvious. So things like joining groups and finding areas you're passionate about outside of your professional focus. So maybe that's like a side hobby. Let's say cooking or photography is not your day-to-day job, but it's something you're really passionate about. There's a lot of groups out there that focus in that space. And you know what? There's a lot of other people who have that as a side hobby too, who have day jobs doing something else. And maybe that something else is something you do, or maybe it's at a company you're really interested in working at. Making those connections in groups like that can go a really long way to getting you your next role when you might not even know. So I guess I'll leave with a power of networking story that's kind of related to that. One of our team members on our recruiting team here at the company Erin and I work with has been super passionate about women in technology. So she's been part of her local chapter for years. She's not a technologist herself, but she's very passionate about the industry. So through that chapter, she met a lot of people. She built a lot of relationships. And when we actually started our new office in the city that she's located in, we hired a leader who was also just really happened to be involved in that chapter, who they had a connection. And when it was time for us to hire a recruiter in that new city, that leader went directly to her and was, hey, you do this. Would you be interested in interviewing for our team? And she wasn't actively really looking, not necessarily unhappy in her role, but she decided to explore it based on that kind of professional connection. And long story short, she made the move and she's made a tremendous impact on our team, but also her and her personal career growth. So you just never know where those connections might lead you in the future. So all in all, when it comes to networking, we know it can be overwhelming, easier said than done to put yourself out there, but it can be very, very rewarding. The only thing I'd say is don't feel like you need to chase every opportunity. So kind of going back to our theme, really find your values, what you're passionate about, and connect with those groups and those people, and then let the rest work for you.
Awesome. And I know we're going to get into some Q&A and we'll pass it back over to Amber, but just wanted to kind of close things out by saying there's no singular right way to approach your job search or your resume or interviews or anything like that. So we just really hope we could provide some additional ways for you all to think about how to approach each of those different things. And we know some of this stuff can be really daunting. So we hope that your kind of biggest takeaway is not to lose your sense of self throughout this process, and just trust like you'll end up where you need to be. Amber, I think you might be muted. I see you talking.
Yes, I am. Thank you. I just wanted to thank you guys so much. This has been really insightful and helpful. And I think we've all gotten a lot of great tips. Okay, so if anyone has any questions, please feel free to either chat, raise your hand, whatever you would like. Jenna and Aaron are here to answer any questions you may have. I will start us off. While we're waiting, I once heard that to make an impactful resume, someone should do, like, under their job description, they should have bullet points with specific things. Would you recommend bullet points? Would you recommend a paragraph? What would you recommend?
That's a good question. I think personal preference and what my eyes typically get drawn to is something that's very easily digestible. So bullet points stand out to me. They're like super succinct, concise. Like I get a great sense of what someone's been doing when they list it out that way. Versus paragraph just takes a little bit longer for me to read through. I'd say hiring manager wise, I hear a lot of feedback around the bulleted items and just having some of those key takeaways a little bit more quickly be able to be referenced when it's listed out like that. But Jenna, anything to add?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think bullet points are a little cleaner. And if you look at a resume as a first impression too, but just on paper. So the easier your eyes can go to just some specifics, the better. You can use your LinkedIn profile to do some of that paragraph stuff, like in your about section, and maybe to kick off every one of your roles, you can have a couple of sentences and then followed by bullet points. So if you want to add more, I'd add it on that avenue rather than on your resume.
Good idea. Okay, Ramsey, I see your hand is raised. Do you have a question?
Yeah. So I just graduated with my master's degree, and I haven't actually had any job experience or work experience in my field. So right now, when I'm looking for work, I'm kind of looking for just about anything, if that makes sense. So tailoring my resume to each specific job can get very time consuming and tedious. So what would you guys maybe recommend for, like, for a freshly a new graduate who, really is like in kind of my position where I'm just looking for any sort of experience because I just want to get hands in and dirty, and all I have is, schooling, which unfortunately doesn't seem to be cutting it.
Great question. Sorry. Yeah. So I totally hear that. I have experienced that myself. I think one recommendation that we typically give to those that don't have a lot of work experience is to feature like the projects that they've been a part of in school, any sort of like curriculum that's relevant to the roles that they're applying for. And when we say tailor your resume to each specific role, I don't think it needs to necessarily be like so exact to the role every single time. I think if you are applying for a variety of project management roles, you want to have a resume that features your experience as it relates to project management. I don't think you need to get as granular as like, what does project management at X company look like versus the company? But if you're looking at PM roles and in addition, like, I don't know, recruiting roles, those are very different, but you probably want a resume that looks slightly different to showcase what experience you've had as it's relevant to recruiting versus the PM stuff that you're probably playing up in the different versions. So I know that's kind of a twofold answer to your question, but I'd say really lean on anything that you've been able to do in school and in the project work that you've been able to do. That's, I know for like our internship program that we run, a lot of people don't have professional experience. So we look at like the different projects that they've done based on their schoolwork, and then also outside projects that they've taken on just independently. Those are totally okay to share too.
Okay.
I wouldn't add anything else other than when you in that project experience, that's good, relevant experience. And you're still going to want to highlight what you did within that project and the key successes of that project. So in your master's program, there was, sure, you had a few projects that were bigger that took a lot of effort and time. And I think you can use that in like the experience section. Just want to be clear that it was a project experience. So people can easily identify that when reading your resume. But so you can use the same tips as if it was an experience thing, just for that individual project experience.
So I guess just a quick follow-up question. What do you mean by project experience? Because so I did a science degree, I did geology. And so everything that I did was towards one end goal. We didn't really have a lot of side projects because we didn't have the time or the money to do any sort of, I guess, side projects. It was one project with one result in mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
Talk about that project, especially if it was something you worked at. I mean, through that full experience, we got a lot to it, right? So you make that as your experience and write out the kind of like key things that were big milestones within that journey. And depending on what the role is that you're wanting out of that, if it's in that same field, you can be really specific with, the specific things on the geology front. If it is something you're looking to branch out and do something else, like maybe I want to start my project, you stay on that train, start my project management train. If you had any kind of lead role in or like organizational role in what you did, whether that be even just like time management of yourself and how you organize throughout that full time of the project, those are the bullet points you can pull out of that experience to kind of highlight some of the things that you've done, if that makes sense.
Okay. No, yeah, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Ramsey. Sophia, would you like to ask your question?
Yes. Odd question. Resume related. I've been employed typically in government for almost 30 years at different industries. I feel like I'm on a 12-year cycle. I've been right out of college the first time. I went into working for local government and I lasted there 12 years at different functions. I kept moving upward. So for instance, I started as a front counter, for instance, and then moved upward. So three different positions. When I moved on from that agency, I moved to another government agency, school district, and I also worked there for about 12 years. And again, I had about 4 different positions. And then I transitioned to where I am currently, college. And I've been here for about 6 years. I don't know if I'll do 12. It's just how it's working out. But The question is, when building a resume, do I have to outline each of those, for instance, government, position 1, and then outline each of the positions I was in there with the different, say, maybe 3-point main duties I performed for each one? Or how does that get condensed?
That's a good question. And I think that ties back to our comments about making your resume relevant to the role. I'd say if there's, obviously you played multiple roles in the different positions that you've had. And so if there's a few that stand out and are really relevant to the new position that you're applying for, definitely include those. But I'd say if they don't really pertain to what you're wanting to get into and you're trying to save space and eliminate some things, like you could probably take those off. I know, like from a personal perspective, I have had a couple of jobs prior to Slalom, and right, like I'll use my LinkedIn for an example. I previously had a lot of information that I shared as it related to the roles that I played in those previous jobs. But now that I've been at Slalom for so long, I've started to take those off because they aren't super relevant to the role that I'm in anymore and the job I'm doing today. So I guess I just shared that as how I've thought about just condensing it. But again, it's going back to that, really focusing on the relevancy of your background to the roles that you're applying for. So I think thinking about it from that lens should help you figure out what you can leave on there and what you can take off.
And then that typically we can go in more in depth as we do, for instance, a cover letter. Most of the positions, whenever you apply, part of the process is to include a cover letter. And I feel that's the opportunity to really highlight skill set, I guess, and how it pertains to the position.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're also in a really unique position where you stayed at companies for so long, so you could probably highlight those companies, and then just, you don't need bullet points for all those roles. So in that first 12-year gig that you had, you can show that you grew a lot, especially because that was your first role. You don't need bullet points underneath any of those. So you can say previous positions and you can just list them out in terms of that growth, and really just focus on what you spent the most time into. Unless some of those other things, again, like Erin said, are relevant to like what you're trying to do next and you want to pull from those. So you can be as creative as you want there.
That works. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sophia. Okay, we had a question in the chat from Afsha. Can we have a job experience listed where we worked for a company for only a few months, or do recruiters see that as negative if that's your latest experience and you're in the job market looking for a new job?
I can start with that. I think it depends. I don't think it's, well, from our vantage point, it's not that negative. Things sometimes don't work out. People get laid off, or maybe it's not a good fit, or whatever the case may be. So it's really hard to draw an assumption. If there's multiple of those in a row, I think that's when some recruiters are like, okay, that might be a flag. But if it was one here or there, I don't think, especially if you've got experience or if it's in an industry that's really relevant to what you're applying for, you can keep that, especially if it's right now too. That's an opportunity for you to add more, maybe in a summary or objective at the top, or in your LinkedIn profile, can really highlight the things that you're looking for in a job or looking for in a company. But I'd say from our vantage point as recruiters, I don't look at someone who's just been in a role for a couple months as a negative thing, or if they've had that at a specific part of their career. It's just when that becomes a pattern is when that gets a little bit tougher.
I would also add, like, have some context to explain the situation, because you probably will get asked about it, just to get an understanding of like, okay, what's not working? What are you wanting to change? If you can justify and share, like, great. That's exactly why we're asking and what we want to hear. I think where a flag goes up is if there's not really if someone's not super forthcoming or like can't justify or share the kind of specific circumstances or experience. So just have that talking point prepared if you are going into conversations with recruiters. But in most cases, people probably will still want to talk to you, but just know that that's probably something they'll ask you about and want to address.
Thank you so much. And Ramsey, did you have another question?
Yeah, just one more. So in my job search, I have found quite a few jobs that when I look at the job description, I know that it's something that I can do given the chance. But when you look at the job requirements, it's like this degree in 5 years experience or some, that kind of stuff, or some experience with some program. It's like, well, I might not have that experience, but I know if I was given the opportunity, I could do it. Because I just went through college. I kind of proved that I can learn and do new things. But like, how do you convey that, especially through like online application portals?
Yeah, great question. So that is, if that application portal has like some pre-questions in it, every application portal is a little different, right? So some ask you some questions, some require a cover letter, some don't. Some companies and industries really value a cover letter, some don't. So if there's an opportunity to do that in the application process and any pre-questionnaires, I think you really take advantage of that. If not, it is a little tough, right? If you just are submitting a resume, then you have to have your resume speak for yourself. However, what I would do if you're really passionate, if you really like that job, there's ways that you can get creative to try to get in touch with that company. So using LinkedIn again, make sure your LinkedIn's complete and filled out and great, like using all the tips we said. But you can go onto their website. You can probably, or on their LinkedIn page, you can probably find that posted job on LinkedIn, and you can probably find who's a recruiter at that company and you could message them. Sometimes you might not get a response, but it is a creative way to try to get in touch with someone. And in that message, you can share a little bit of that determination that you have and express yourself in that way. So it's a little unconventional, but it's also a way to sometimes stand out from the pack or get in there if you're not seeing the responses that you want.
Sorry, that's actually really great advice, because I was sort of wondering if that was like kind of taboo or not, but that's really
People
cool.
do it all the time. Yeah. You gotta know some recruiters might not respond because maybe they don't have the ability to do that, or they, for some reason or another, not every company's recruiting team is super responsive, things like that. But the ones that are, and the ones that see that value, I mean, you got nothing to lose at that point, right?
Yeah,
Cool. That's great.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, you can also reach out to people that like sit in that role today and ask them to like talk about what they do and how to better prepare or frame like your experience to try and drive toward getting a conversation from the application that you submit. So going recruiters and seeking them out is a great route. Looking at different people that work at the company that do something similar, you should also reach out to them. They can do more of like that informational interview and just share probably good insight that you're not even able to pick up from the job description.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I don't think I see any other questions. So I think this is a great time to end. Jenna and Erin, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. We really appreciate it. And this has been very insightful. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. Have a good day, everyone. Go Cougs.
Go Cougs.